You're listening to 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College in Garden City, New York. I'm Bill McIntyre, here with Jon Gallo for another edition of this week's Long Island News. And now we're happy to have joining us for the first time Dr. Michael Hynes, who has served as the superintendent of the Port Washington School District in northern Nassau County since July of 2019. And prior to that, Michael was the superintendent to the Patchogue-Medford School District on Suffolk County's South Shore since 2014. Good morning, sir. How are you?
I am well. Good morning to you.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I know you're probably busy with school right around the corner, right? And there are so many issues and things going on now that you probably never had to deal with before. Right.
I would agree. First, I just want to say I appreciate the opportunity to speak to residents here in Nassau County and maybe beyond. We're a week before school begins, so this is usually. I have two favorite days of the year. One is the first day of school. I'm not going to say the last day of school because that would sound mean, but it's graduation day.
Exactly.
So, we've been preparing all summer. And to answer your question, Bill, listen, there are a lot of lessons learned from last year. We're trying to apply them this year, but I have a feeling we'll be learning more lessons as this year unfolds.
Yeah, I definitely think that is true. And maybe to that point, we do tend to start even with elected officials, but anyone who's kind of in a public service role, we're just kind of recapping, in brief, your thoughts of kind of how we've managed to this point and how we've gotten to this, point of the pandemic. And thankfully, the infection rate isn't as high as it was before, but the Delta variant certainly has changed the equation. And certainly, your role of keeping students and families safe, is no small task. So can you just talk about how you've experienced it, you and your fellow administrators in the Port Washington School District? Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. So if we go back to March of 20, I can tell you nobody expected what the next 16, 17 months would entail. I think there are silver linings that we can certainly glean from and apply. But all in all, it was really, really difficult, not only for our kids, but for our parents, certainly administrators, and definitely our teachers, because they have had to do a complete 180 as far as the way they teach and the way they plan and everything else that's in between. But like I said, there are some silver linings. My biggest concern is the mental health and the physical health of our staff. At the beginning of this year, it was incredibly important for me to underscore as much as I could that they needed to take care of themselves this summer. I didn't want to hear from them. I always want to hear from them, but I didn't want to hear from them this summer. And the same thing for administrators. They needed to replenish their souls. They needed to replenish everything from a mental, a social, and a physical and a spiritual capacity to get ready for this year. Which is, I believe, we are ready for right now. And I'm hoping, and I know we're going to talk about mask mandates and other things that we're going to do to mitigate all the different things. But yeah, we are ready. We're in a 3-point stance, if we're going to talk to football terms here, and we are ready for our kids to come back.
That is great. That is certainly, I'm sure, music to a lot of parents' ears, and I'm sure a lot of students too are happy to know, where things stand. And we'll get into that, like you said, in a moment. But maybe just in terms of some of those other issues that you just mentioned, like mental health. I know that a lot of schools have been using like peer kind of advisors and like other kind of methods, because obviously, like you said, this has been tough on parents, but trying to communicate it in a way that's, kind of digestible to the range of students in the district, both the high schoolers, in their kind of senior years, to the young ones, of course, is not an easy and kind of one size fits all task by any means. So can you talk a little bit about that, how the staff has figured, to kind of navigate that in a sensitive, culturally sensitive way? Things also maybe like food insecurity, other issues that, weren't really there as much as they were throughout the pandemic.
Yeah, there are so many spokes on this pandemic wheel when it comes to the way that schools had to refunction and think about things. So food insecurity, technology, we want to make sure that all of our students, from an equity and access standpoint, had everything. We actually had to, and I'm thankful for, we had to move to a one-on-one initiative. So that means every single student last year, they were given either an iPad or they were given a laptop, which is great news. And for students who didn't have internet access, we made sure they had hotspots, so they had internet access for anything they had to do in regard to teaching and learning. Same thing for food insecurity in regard to our families. As you may know, Port Washington, it's a melting pot. It's an eclectic mix of socioeconomic different statuses that are here, and so our churches were great. We partnered with our churches out here to make sure that our families had food, almost every single day of the week, which is great. And so we will definitely continue that. We want to make sure that all of our families and our students, have food, because listen, when it comes to the basic needs being met, and I know we're going to talk about social and emotional and how important that is. If you don't have shelter, if you don't sleep well, if you don't have food in your belly, and you're not in a good place mentally, it's almost impossible to learn. Think of us as adults, how hard it is for us to function. If I get in a fight with my wife before I get to work, I'm pretty much dead for the first two hours, because I am not grounded. And so we have to put in the forefront of our minds. And we have 34 new teachers this year. 34 new teachers, which is unheard of. Yeah. And the one thing I really pressed upon them was it's relationships. It's making sure kids get what they need and they want. And those adult relationships and those peer relationships, John, as you mentioned before, are so critically important. So we hired more social workers within our school district to make sure if there are counseling services that kids need. We actually hired a community liaison to partner with their parents to make sure that they have access to other agencies and other wonderful organizations out here in Port Washington, to work with our guidance counselors, to work with our social workers, to work in a synergistic way. So this is definitely in the forefront of our minds as we move into this year.
Wow, yeah, that's definitely great. And like you said, those lessons learned, where lots of obstacles and challenges, but certainly a lot of lessons to take away. And, a lot of the things that Bill and I have discussed with a number of the elected officials and other folks that are, on the front lines of kind of dealing with those issues, is the fact that those issues were here prior to the pandemic, but they obviously got exacerbated, and not letting it just kind of fall to the wayside and just kind of accepting where we were, but really trying to, have that holistic kind of systems-wide approach to, bettering everyone's kind of quality of life, to therefore hopefully help their educational outcomes. Yeah, like you said,
it looks like
achieve if you're just struggling for homeostasis. But go ahead, Bill.
You think that the certainly the landscape of schooling has changed through the pandemic? I mean, I've heard some schools, say that they really don't want to go back to home learning. That whole, and it was really great. I mean, I got to be honest, watching how people stepped up, just the technical things that people had to learn. And, a teacher was told, oh, here's your laptop and we'll meet you on Zoom and then we'll see this one and you're going to give a lecture to 50 kids on. And you know what? Yeah. They did it. They did it. The same thing as John and I have been all along during this thing. We've been calling the kids in school. They're the heroes because they were told they had to wear a mask. Not a peep, and they did it. Because the big fear was that the virus was going to grow like crazy because all the kids were going back to school, and that didn't happen.
Nope.
And it didn't. It was because of the kids. They just did what they needed to do.
Following the leadership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When we talk about the mask thing, I refer to the little babies and the big babies, and the little babies are not complaining. It's the big babies that are complaining. And when I hear a kid. You can kind of tell when a second grader is parroting their parents. To use a word that they never used, and they're continually repeating and repeating. So, okay, where'd you get that? Well, my mom says. And go, great, here we go. So, because we've spoken to some other legislators, I think, keep talking about dealing with masks scientifically, not politically.
That's right.
But I think the landscape is definitely changed, and that's kind of changed your job.
Oh my gosh! Listen, so many things have changed. So many things have changed with the superintendency. We're expected to be doctors, resident experts in so many different things, and the bottom line for us is we lean on the experts to give us guidance as far as to make informed decisions. But when it comes to masks and it comes to, let's just say, the politicalness of a lot of different things that are coming our way, whether it's critical race theory, whether it's masks, whether it's vaccines, whatever it is, for me, the most important thing is, when I close my eyes and I think about what's in the best interest of our kids, that's how we make decisions here. And that's how I want to articulate my recommendations to the board and certainly to the community. But when you do that, and I know you understand this, is that you draw a distinct line in the sand, and you will have people on one side and you'll have people on the other side. And you have to embrace that. You have to embrace that in knowing every decision, almost every decision that you make, you will have people who are upset. And that's why we have to base our decisions and recommendations on science.
Yeah, that is exactly is right.
One of the trends, one of the things that we saw was there was a Facebook group. I'm not even going to mention the name, but what they were doing was basically targeting Board of Education meetings and going in and complaining about. I mean, I heard one guy, and this was in, I think, Massapequa, saying that his children's teeth were being affected by wearing a mask, and I thought, where do you get this stuff? It boggles, it really does.
Well, if I could, I have many children at home, right, and the ages range from college to going into first grade, and I happen to have a beautiful daughter who happens to have Down syndrome, and she's going into third grade. And let me tell you something. If our students with disabilities can wear masks and not complain, and if we can figure out ways where they can take mask breaks throughout the day, which is, of course, incredibly important. We know it's hot in September. We know it's hot in June and in May, but there are certain things that I know that all school districts do. They may not broadcast it, but they do things to make sure there's relief throughout the day for the staff and for kids, and they do it in a safe way. And so when I hear parents complain about X, Y, or Z, I try to suspend certainty about certain things, because in some ways I have to be like Switzerland. I have to listen to all sides of whatever is happening. But in the end, I go based on my experience as a dad, as a parent, as a husband, as an educator. And we will get through this, but we have to do this civilly. And I said this to Newsday a couple of weeks ago. I said, listen, the bottom line is we can disagree about stuff. I don't know what the heck happened over the past 2 or 3 years, but it's like if you say something and people don't agree with it, they take your legs out, they take your arms off, they want to do all sorts of things. And it can't be that way, especially when we're talking about kids, especially in public in a board meeting. That's what upsets me the most, because people see this and they do it and they stage it, and it's beyond inappropriate.
Yeah, one of the things we looked at was there's what is it called, an open government declaration from New York State that came out in about 2006. It says that a Board of Education can close their meetings if they want to, but if they keep them open, they have no right to discriminate so people can get up and speak who aren't even in the school district. And that's what's been going on, with the against the mask mandates. And you've got this barrage of people that come in, take over the meeting. They're louder than everybody else. The Massapequa School District, they released a statement after the new governor put out the mask mandate. They released a statement that they're going with the decision of their Board of Education. Now,
which was in opposition.
Right. Governor Cuomo had said that if you don't follow the mask mandate, I'm going to hurt you financially. Well, the new governor hasn't responded with that yet, but I'm curious to see what the Massapequa School District says when they find out that there's going to be a shortfall because the state's not going to give you the funding, and now the residents are going to have to make up that money. And
and that's like a third rail. You're holding like a glass of water, holding onto a electric wire. The thing is that the governor can, I believe, move forward with sanctions. So whether they are financial, whether they are the potential removal of certain, individuals within a school district, like you have to know what the unintended and the intended consequences are, and think about all of those things before you move forward. I am all for standing up for what you believe in, but you have to look at things in its totality and to understand the impact of the whole community that you're serving moving forward. So I guess we'll see.
Of course. And
Yeah.
let's just remind our listeners that they are listening to this week's Long Island News here on 90.3 WHBC, the voice of Nassau Community College, with Bill McIntyre, myself, Jon Gallo, and still thankfully joined by Port Washington Schools Superintendent Hynes, Dr. Michael Hynes. So, yeah, that is certainly, obviously the main topic in the news right now in terms of, this kind of back and forth. And you described and, Bill kind of articulated what he's seen from his local school district over in Massapequa. But that's something, maybe just to take a step back before we go into, and let me just actually say for the record too, that the Port Washington School, their Board of Ed, they did make the decision, I believe, on the 10th. So that was prior to this, mandate that came out from the new Governor Hochul. And that was, going off of information from, I believe, the American Academy of Pediatrics and some other types of, reputable organizations in that space that gave out that information. So point being is, though, how do you handle that conversation, let alone the idea of having kids handle the mask, but when they see their parents, kind of going back and forth, we saw this issue with other things like, high school sports and, where things got way too heated and, taken out of control. But this is a whole new level between this and the CRT conversations. How are you kind of navigating that with, again, the population of students there in Port?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. Right now, I believe we are in the embryonic stages of these types of conversations. So for us, it's all about modeling the way that we want, this civil discourse moving forward. I had a conversation with our administrators yesterday. We meet once a week and we talk about, what if this happens? What if that happens? We try to, troubleshoot scenarios. And one of the scenarios was, what if a student comes to school with no mask on because a parent tells them not to?
Yeah.
So what do you do? So we have protocols in place now, to try to streamline and make sure if and when that does take place, we do X, Y, and Z. I've received letters already, and I think other superintendents have as well, really stating that it'll be considered assault if their child who shouldn't wear a mask, if we attempt to put their mask on for them, which we would never do. So there are lots of things that we have to model. We have to keep a very cool head when we're articulating and speaking with parents and talking about why things are taking place. The board meetings, though, are a different conversation because, John, as you said before, it's a forum for them to share exactly what they're thinking and feeling. And for the most part, most board meetings, the board members don't interact. They just do a lot of listening. And as I said before, before this pandemic, I don't think anybody really paid attention to board meetings. During the pandemic, though, once they went on to Zoom, we've had upwards of 1,200, 1,500 people watch board meetings live, not just a week or 2 weeks later. So they're a lot more connected. And so when we see people who go off on tangents who are concerned about X, Y, and Z, I know for a fact our students see this. So make a long story longer, we have a lot of work to do with our teachers, with our administrators to make sure that we are the models of the way that we want this message to be shared. And when we have disagreements, there is a way to resolve certain conflicts, and that's what we will continue to do.
Talk about a different landscape right
Governor
there.
Hochul's decision, that mandate, makes it a little bit easier for some of those parents who were, saying that this was a standalone decision versus now this is coming from kind of the top, or is it still kind of?
I've learned two things, John, over many years. One is it's hard to change your mind, but it's almost impossible to change somebody else's. So I think it may make it easier in some instances because superintendents have something to hang their hat on. I think it will take some wind out of the sails of some parents, but for those who are really adamant about what they're thinking and feeling, I think they'll continue to press because they're part of, as you said before, different Facebook groups that will continue to promote X, Y, and Z.
Interesting, though, that, conversely, when you say if you try to put a mask on a kid, that would be considered assault. If the child tests positive and refuses to wear a mask, what's that considered?
Well, that's the thing, right? So it impacts others in a way that,
Public endangerment.
Yeah. And that's what we have to think about. That's the reason why we're using it. We imparted a mask mandate for two reasons. One, certainly, as you listed all those agencies, CDC and everyone else. But what it does, it protects students from other students, and we don't have to quarantine as much. I mean, to me, that's a no-brainer. We quarantined so many kids last year and so many staff members last year. The fact that we won't have to potentially, if a student, God forbid, does test positive, we won't have to isolate a whole class. We can just either scoop, or if a student has a tight-fitting mask on, we won't have to quarantine anybody else. Right. That's a huge plus because we want kids in school learning.
Yeah. There's one other issue that I was approached by somebody that their son went to lunch, and when he came back from lunch, he threw up. And, of course, they sent him to the nurse, and the nurse insisted that he go home. And the school then said that he needs to have a COVID test before he comes back to school. And a parent realized that they're looking at a $130 bill for a COVID test. When initially, when this all started, I think COVID tests were free. People could get tested. But now as we trail off and go into the netherworld because there don't seem to be any standard rules, but something like that, they're all afraid of the school nurse now. Because, she's like the cop writing a traffic ticket.
There's like a price tag to it.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I get that. And if you can't go through insurance, it's a hardship on families. And these are the things that we have to consider as we move forward. That's a really interesting scenario, Bill, that I don't think we've considered, to be honest with you. So I'm glad you brought it up here for us to troubleshoot if that's the case and to see if we could assist in some way. Yeah. But listen, what about vaccines? Like what if
we were going to go?
I have a feeling, right? So like if there is truly a mandate for vaccinations and then there's a testing component behind it, I mean, I can't even begin to tell you from a systemic standpoint what that means for a school district during the day, and then even after the school day, as far as what that looks like and what that sounds like, as far as tracking then all staff members, not just teachers, but all staff members, to make sure they show their card, so we have all that information. There are many people who don't want to let you know because of HIPAA laws that they've done X, Y, or Z. So there's a lot, and then there's negotiations with the bargaining units that we would have to do because this is not just an edict and then we just do it.
Right.
There's a lot of things that will take time that we would have to negotiate.
Yeah.
So so we're preparing for that too.
I just think it's mind-boggling. I'd love to let the listening audience, sit back and realize for a second that these folks now have all of these things in their lap, but their main job is to educate the children. They still have to do that.
Yeah.
And then all of the added, it's mind-boggling. It really is.
That's why, the more that this issue can be put to bed, by methods of, the vaccine and protections, potentially like the mask mandate and other things, ventilation, that seems to be, why everyone wants this to be over with. But to your point of the vaccines, the big factor is that for students that under 12, they don't have, the FDA clearance to receive any vaccine. So that's a whole nother aspect of the equation. And how much does that play into discussion about, the employees, therefore, and them having to, potentially be, vaccinated. So, could you talk about that to our listeners? And what is exactly the port policy? And is that different or kind of uniform with other neighboring school districts?
Yeah, it's uniform with other school districts. I think, as we're trying to read the tea leaves here, let's say 12 and under or 11 and under can get vaccinated, let's say by January.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many parents are going to want their 11 and under kids get vaccinated. And then there comes the point, like, what is the tipping point where you have herd mentality within your school and then school district? Because you can't do it piecemeal. You can't just have, let's say, Great Neck do it, we don't do it. And then you have Roslyn do it, and then Manhasset doesn't do it. It doesn't really help. It needs to be uniform across the board. So if this ever moves into the direction where this is a vaccine, and I probably shouldn't say this, but that is truly mandated for all kids, like polio and all the other vaccines that are out there. That's something that, maybe the governor's thinking about at some point. But this piecemeal stuff, I think we've learned over time, it may work temporarily, but it's not going to work longitudinally, I don't think. And there are other variants that are coming down the road. I have a board member who's in Greece right now, and she's already talking about 2 other Greek letter alphabet
Lambda
variants, that are coming this way. So this isn't going away by by the winter or going away by the summer of 22. This is something we're going to have to live with for a while, but we also can't live in fear. And I think to Bill's point, at some point, and we will come next week, it's about educating our kids, and it's about making sure that they feel safe and secure. And we can't have parents and other agencies out there trying to disrupt that process when we're
Of course, of course.
I'm with
And to that point, obviously, there's a lot of things that are incurring cost, for the districts. This has, been something that has not been easy for any school district to, afford what is the technology, whether, like you said, the ventilation. But I know the state, I think, issued what would be considered, maximum foundation aid, and there were some, things that came from the federal government too. Is that still, kind of a factor into this new school year? There still is that support coming that can help, kind of establish all this. That is still coming your way.
Yeah, John, that I could tell you that the federal monies that came in, and certainly the extra state aid was incredibly important. We overspent in Port Washington, our budget just on COVID related costs, close to $2.5 million. That's a massive amount of money that we were really concerned about, because we were thinking we would have to dip into reserves, which we don't have much of, to pay for that. So to know that that is replenished and we have some extra money to spend on anything that's related to, as you mentioned, filtration with HEPA filters or anything else that we have to do. I think we are in a good place, and I believe most school districts are in a decent place as well. We had to hire a lot of different people last year too, that we typically wouldn't have hired, as far as assisting our students in multiple capacities. So I think we're in a pretty good place right now, which is good.
Okay. News. Okay. And then just to follow up on that point, because I know Bill is a big advocate, and all of us are, of the arts, but Bill in particular is a musician out here on Long Island. In terms of those issues, in terms of funding for arts education and extracurricular activities, like sports, how has that been? Is that money still there? Or obviously there were issues with actually just holding the activities during the pandemic, but now that I believe for sports there is no state kind of declaration that you can't do it. The city's decided one thing, and I think other folks will decide other things, but in terms of that, where do things stand for those programs?
Yeah, sports, it's for Section 8 here in Nassau County, it's all systems go. So we're good to go. And again, I do is a truncated schedule for our students last year, and we know how important sports is for our kids. And to Bill's point, as far as the arts, so when we're talking about art itself and/or theater and/or music, I can't think of anything more important for our kids to feel connected to school and to their peers. So yeah, we are all systems go for that too as well. Anything that's performance based, right, is so important for our kids. So one of the things, though, I have to say, when we're looking at large gatherings, this is the one concern we have right now, when it comes to performance. So whether it's a musical production or anything else, we're still fleshing out what that looks like and what that will be, whether it's live when we have parents there, or whether we show, if we have, a concert for usually 300 people, we may break it up into 3 concerts of 100. Those are the things we're still fleshing out, but we're trying to get back to as much as normal as possible pre-COVID. And I think we're doing a relatively good job. But I'm glad you brought up the arts, and you brought up sports and clubs and activities, because the kids didn't have that last year, and it really impacted them in a negative way.
Those are the first things to get cut when money's tight. I think I always bring up the quote, because I'm an old guy. Somebody asked Winston Churchill during the war, they said, we're going to need more money, so I think we're going to have to cut funding to the arts. And he turned around and said, if we do that, what are we fighting for? And it's true. I mean, that's
100% true. I couldn't agree with Winston more.
So certainly,
I have a question, though. I was just curious about, I saw there was some stories about the regents, the Board of Regents, wanting to do some things. And the first thing that occurred to me, and I wanted to ask you this, when I graduated high school, I got a Regents diploma. Yeah. I believe at the time the only 2 states that required it were California and New York.
Right.
And so here I am 50 years later reading about what the Board of Regents wants. And I'm curious how they got to stick around for so long.
How much time do we have?
I was going to say, I don't know if we have time for that much of an in-depth answer for this, or too much of a discussion about their new guidance. But we'll certainly have you back on to kind of flesh that out.
That's always a promise we ask
some,
that you'll come
recent
back.
Articles in Newsday where you were quoted, of course, in terms of, I believe, an audit that the Port Washington School District is going to be kind of doing in conjunction with the NYU, with one of their academic departments. But I guess maybe if you could just answer Bill's question quickly, and then if you could just give maybe like a less than 30 seconds to a minute on the other one.
But then you do have to come back because
we'll discuss it further too, obviously, with the legislator who would join us very shortly. Legislator Bynoe also.
You bet. All right. So, Bill, to answer your question, it's been around almost since the Civil War, the Board of Regents. And we are one of, I want to say, less than a handful of state education departments that necessitate almost 5 exit exams in order to graduate, which is archaic. So there's a lot of things that need to change. I will say with our new commissioner, who was the chancellor before, Betty Rosa, I love her. She's amazing. And I think she is looking to make some changes there. So more to come about that later on. As far as, this conversations about the potential of critical race theory and what it means and how it's been conflated with so many other things. The state education department, and thankfully so, they push forward culturally responsive teaching. What does that mean? Does our staff reflect our community as far as its actual makeup? When we focus, so our work here with NYU, partnering with NYU Metro, they played a large hand in creating that guidance with state ed. So now they've partnered with us. We're focusing on disproportionality. Why is it when we look at kids who graduate, and by the way, anybody who doesn't graduate, that's our fault. It's not the kid's fault. It's our fault. And that is a lifetime sentence of pain for kids who don't graduate. And we have subgroups here, our Latinx population, our African-American population, students with disabilities, or ENL kids. It's not nearly as high as it should be. So what can we do? What should we do? And what will we do to correct that? And we got to focus on disproportionality, where it lies within our policies and everything else within our system. Therefore, the forensic audit.
Okay. Therefore, we certainly, again, recommend everyone to follow along with what the Port Washington School District is doing. I know that term Port Strong, I know was used a lot, and we certainly support that and, wish for the best for you, for all the teachers, all the parents, and of course, most importantly, all the students of the Port Washington School District in this upcoming school year, and hopefully, that a lot of the things that, we appreciate and took for granted are, fully actualized this year.
Got to get you.
Thank you so much for your time.
Promise
we look
to come back.
To having you on again. Discuss these matters
we
further.
hope to see you again, and thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
We'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Take care. Have a good rest of your weekend and summer.
You as well.
Thanks. All right, Bill.
Okay.
Yeah, full plate there with all those issues going on in education with the school year just about to start, and we can discuss some of them as well with our guest who's joining us right now as well, Nassau County Legislator Siela Bynoe. And a lot of the other matters that she's leading from the front on, a lot of concerns or discussion rather about some of the bills that are passing through and moving through the legislature. So happy to have her on. So good morning.
Hello, how are you?
Good morning.
Good morning.
How's everybody today?
We're good.
So far, so good. It is Friday, so we're always happy about that.
Exactly. A hot, humid Friday. The summer's still here. So we're happy about that for the moment.
And despite other folks trying to rush the fall, like Dunkin' Donuts.
Oh, boy. That PSL, I cannot take that as a legitimate acronym. I'm just like, no, please no. But okay, nonetheless, like I said, we are folding into the fall school year. We're going to do the intro right now.
Yeah, we just want to remind our listening audience that, of course, we're happy to have you join us again. And anytime you want to come on, you can let us know, or if we call you, we hope to get you on. Siela Bynoe represents constituents from Nassau's 2nd Legislative District, and that includes portions of Hempstead, Lakeview, Westbury, Newcastle, Hicksville, Uniondale, and Rockville Center. Boy, that's quite a map. That's a lot of territory, isn't it?
Right. Absolutely.
Yep, and a lot of important issues that are impacting, obviously, the residents and your constituents out here in Nassau County. And we'll get through a lot of them. The school year, of course, is one. I know you had an event recently with a kind of back-to-school drive, I think in Rockville Center, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. But we'll get into that later. But first, we have to talk about what was in national news and, what Certainly was a heated discussion, we'll say, to put it lightly, and obviously it's an important topic regarding your colleague, Nassau County Legislator Lafazan's bill, which was passed by the legislature, but was ultimately vetoed after consultation from the Attorney General with the Nassau County Executive, Laura Curran, again, making that veto. There's still some discussion about maybe the majority trying to override that. So we're happy to hear your perspective, and we know that you've been certainly a voice kind of prominence on this matter. So thanks for joining us, and if you could tell our listeners, I guess, kind of where we were and where we are now on that issue first to start.
Sure. Good morning. So the issue bubbled up out of that 18721 bill, and it really had a significant impact across the region, and as you said, nationally. There were some components of that bill that really made it what I consider to be a dangerous bill. It was dangerous to me on a couple of fronts, aside from whether it was constitutionally, the right thing legally, or politically. I just think it had moral, the moral impacts, I think, were what resonated with me. When you talk about a protected class, one of the number one attributes of that is that it has immutable characteristics, meaning unchangeable characteristics. So I don't believe a profession should be included in that class, with the exception of a veteran. So the immutable changes indicate that you don't take a vacation from it. Yeah. you don't take sick time from it. You don't take a break from it, and you don't retire from it. And more importantly, in this particular case for professions, they voluntarily engage in that profession.
Of course, which is different than a lot of the other statuses which you happen to be born into, and like you said, they're intrinsic and immutable. Yeah. So okay, understood.
And so for that reason, I thought it, inappropriate for us to be looking to perpetuate an error that we made earlier, because we did in fact include first responders in an earlier bill from 2000, I think it was 19, but it was related to specifically around housing discrimination. And it was originally, the bill was submitted for veterans. And at some point later on, I believe it was modified, even if I'm wrong on the fact that it was original, that the premise for me was the veterans. And so I think I overlooked the fact that we were, the impact that including first responders in that bill, how it would have on the protected class portion. So in any event, the argument had been, they're already included, but I don't think we needed to perpetuate that earlier mistake. So that being said, we have a lot of veterans that, are still, here in Nassau County that in many cases were drafted and going out to war. You'd never change being a veteran. Once you've went through a veteran, you are a veteran. And the sacrifices that our veterans make for us, I think, are worthy of that inclusion. And there are, stigmas attached to veterans, because people believe that, they come with a set of challenges, and specifically in housing. And I know that for a fact as a previous executive director of a housing authority. So I was fine with protecting our veterans. And I think we sufficiently protect our police officers under the criminal penal code. If I menace you as a regular citizen, a misdemeanor. If I menace a police officer, it rises to a higher level, I believe, of a felony. So I think there are significant protections already for our police officers. I know they don't qualify under the immutable characteristics. And the other problem that I thought was significant in the bill was that it was an irrebuttable presumption that if one injured, menaced, harassed, or assaulted an officer, that it was only for, they only did it for the fact that they were discriminatory toward police. And I could think of many different reasons why a police officer might be menaced, harassed, injured, or assaulted in the line of duty. It could be someone who is under duress. It could be someone who's just really trying to, evade, an arrest.
Yep.
And it's not because they hate police officers. So that was another major flaw in the bill.
Yeah.
So I voted against it I didn't support it, I should say, in committees. I definitely voted against it in the full legislature.
I'm curious, when you first heard of the bill, what was your immediate, because my knee-jerk reaction, I'll tell you what that was later, but how did you feel about that when you first saw that what I would call an attempt was made? It was successful, but, how did you feel about that one?
I was astonished, quite frankly. There were a wide range of emotions, perplexed. We're on radio, so I won't.
Yeah. No.
Any of the colorful language, I was just like, I was really perplexed. And I have to tell you that I read the bill separate and apart from my colleagues. I read it at home, and so when I read the bill, I instantly knew we had an issue. So, and I immediately went into action to try and see if we could stop the bill from even being called in committees.
Right.
And just before Bill gets to his reaction, did you kind of expect it to get as far as it did? I mean, obviously the Republicans have the majority, but I know some.
She's saying yes.
Kind of,
She's saying yes. She expected.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I'll tell you. Yeah.
I'm going to tell you quite honestly, that bill. There were two bills submitted at the same time by this same legislator. And I think it had the support from all of the other legislators who signed on to 18721, also signed, I believe, onto the other bill, Blue Alert.
Okay.
And so they quickly took my colleagues of the other caucus, they looked at those bills and they took and made some changes to both bills. And then they took Josh's name off the Blue Alert bill and put their names on, but left his name on this 18721 bill because they knew what they had before we knew what we had done. They knew they had a smoking gun. So, and they said the Blue Alert bill. They said, "Oh, the only thing that could be better about this bill is if our names, if it was our idea and our names were on it." Right. So they put their names on it. They realized the only thing the only thing that really made that 18721 a great, a really good political, wedge was to leave his name on it. So it was better not to have their names prominently attached to the bill.
Yeah, knowing that he is technically an independent who caucuses with the Democrats versus a technical member of the Republican majority in the legislature. Okay,
I'll tell you, when I first saw the bill, it reminded me again why I keep telling people that we live in the upside down. Just to see that bill, when I first read it, I had your reaction. You have to be kidding.
Absolutely.
You have to be kidding. But, it should make us all sit back and think these thrusts with this, and I'm going to call it what I think it is, crazy kind of stuff. But it's not, because people are entertaining these things as, the other thing about the bill itself was that, you can't harass somebody. Okay. They didn't define any of those terms.
Yeah, very vague.
So if I'm standing on a street corner watching, elected official or a policeman in the middle of the road beating the daylights out of somebody for what I can see is no reason, my videotaping that could be considered harassment or assault.
100%.
Now, you said that, you think that bill was dangerous for a certain segment of the population, and I think it's dangerous for everybody.
No. I definitely, and that's part of what I said on the floor too. I'm going to tell you the two other dangers I see about this bill. aside from, diluting the effectiveness of, the
Hate
human rights
crime.
law,
Yeah.
and then the dangers of putting people in civil cases, with a hate crime. I think two of the other things that were prominent to me is that we will chill the effect of protests. We will chill the effect of community, the chilling effect of community being able to document when they see something happening that's questionable. And I also think a danger, and I said this on the floor, we're further eroding the trust between community and police. And so we should be working together after George Floyd to bring us together and find ways to unpack some of these things, reconcile to some of these things, and maybe listen. I'm in a profession that had to be reimaged, right? We have to have a lot of transparency and accountability and all those things to gain back the public's trust. And so I would liken that to recoiling some of those efforts that we've made, and as elected officials, by doing these disclosures and all these other things to make sure that we're providing as much information about us, both our elected lives and our personal lives and our other professional lives. I liken that to just saying we're not doing that anymore. And so it just says to the public, well, what are you hiding, right? And so when you take an opportunity to now put a further wedge between community and police in such a way, I think that it creates more of a dangerous kind of environment out there. Sure. And I said that on the floor, and in speaking to police officials, they shared some folks shared that concern. They don't need anything else that makes their job any harder to go out in the field and engage with community if they now think that they could be sued or what have you.
Yeah.
So,
but I think, though, that one of the things that's going on here is, we have a whole bunch of laws, but they're not enforced. That's what I think the community sees. But every time an election comes around, somebody says, oh, I'm going to pass a law that says X. We already have those. But where is the will to enforce them? Just like and we spoke to the police commissioner about this. There were 2 or 3 cops in Brooklyn that got doused with water by the locals, local kids or whatever, but they doused the cops. And I thought, well, right at that moment, that's assault. It didn't matter if you threw a rock or they doused these officers in uniform with water. They should have been detained and arrested. And, but our thing is we need a new law. Well, we have a law that you didn't enforce. What good is a new one going to do? Because now they were trying to create an assault law for every kind of article that could be thrown across. We have a law if you can't throw a rock. We have a law you can't. It's getting ridiculous.
The point is that there are statutes like you obviously mentioned, Legislator Bynoe, that are on the books, and certainly as opposed to certain other classes, minority groups that maybe don't have, we'll say, the same kind of social standing as police do in terms of a court proceeding. Police certainly have the ability to pursue, these charges and at the highest level, kind of legally possible if it is something that's impacting or, aimed at a officer of the law, who's in plain clothes. I guess another issue too with that bill was that was also including folks who were not in plain clothes, right? That also included, I think, potentially retired police officers as well, right?
Yes, that was another issue that I talked to on the floor. I think I could have expounded a little bit more on that because that was an issue that definitely was, I read the bill no less than, a dozen times, right? And I just kept picking up different, nuggets of it. And at some point I was like, wait a minute, now we're protecting the retired police officers or first responders, I should say. And I thought that was, it was very telling, to me. And I just want to kind of go back to Bill's point, and I would say that the enforcement of laws, I think it cuts both ways. I think that we have a lot of procedures and policies in place as it relates to police misconduct.
Mm-hmm.
And quite often we don't see those play out either,
Yep.
as well as when there are, issues that are, or allegations against the general public that aren't always enforced as well.
Yep.
So I think it cuts both ways.
Yeah.
David Chauvin was an outlier in many people's eyes when he was convicted, because there's tens and thousands of videos, on social media that show police in very questionable, in many cases, very clearly not following protocol, and very clearly, violating people's civil rights, and very clearly assaulting and harming people, and in some cases killing people. And in many cases, what the general public is seeing is that they walk away unscathed.
Yeah.
And so that's creating a lot of the tension. So
Yes.
I agree that there needs to be better enforcement across the board.
Well, when we spoke to the
can't be
police
selective.
commissioner, one of the constant retorts is that, not from the commissioner, I'm saying in general, is that we're a country of laws. And I said to the commissioner that, we had a financial meltdown in 2008 caused by people on Wall Street who admitted criminal activity, and not one of those people stood in front of a judge. Not one. But then on the other end of the spectrum, you also have lawmakers who are creating these nuisance laws, which are really only there to harass those with the least. It's illegal to be homeless. It's illegal to sleep on a park bench. You have them spending money in cities putting spikes on places where people would sit to rest. Again, the upside down. This is, these people were supposed to get into public service to help people navigate life, not to make it difficult or more difficult than it already is. But that's what you see. And those are the laws that get enforced. Some poor guy who wanted to sit down for a minute because he had to stand all day or whatever, he's the guy that gets dragged in, and he gets run through the mill, not the banker that put us through $1 billion, financial. And then the question is, gee, why don't they trust us?
Yeah, a lot of times I feel like we deal with symptoms,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't get to the root cause of issues.
Exactly.
Even this morning on the way in, one of my pet peeves is littering. And I drove in this morning, and I live in the village of Westbury. It's easier for me just to get on the Northern State than coming down Jericho Turnpike and hit all those traffic lights.
Of course.
So I'm driving down Northern State. I get on at 32, and I get off at the very next exit. I get off, and in between that stretch, I saw at least 3 or 4 bags of garbage, and not the little like McDonald's. I'm talking contractor bags of garbage, right? And so I said to myself, we've got to look at the root cause of why people are dumping, and then maybe modify some of our fee structures or our ability to receive that garbage, and not make it so costly for contractors or people who are just doing work in their home. I don't know who the dumpers are.
Yeah, right.
But we need to get to the root cause of, we need to find out exactly who these dumpers are, right? We know in some cases that they're definitely contractors, right? But we need to look at what's happening, because even in residential areas, you can see, we did a big cleanup over in Lakeview the day before the backpack event. And you could see that it was neighborhood people just dumping garbage in certain areas and furniture and the like, because maybe the provisions for putting out garbage make it restrictive for them. So they rather just dump it. So again, we'd like to find people, for those type of activities. And I don't think we shouldn't find them, and we should enforce it. But my point is, let's figure out why people are doing certain things. Right. Why is the guy sleeping, on the park bench? what's going on with the gentleman
Right.
who's clearly probably or women who are suffering from some level of behavioral health issues, and we need to address those issues and stop looking at symptoms. We're a country that just does that on a regular basis.
Yeah, of course. We can't just put it out of sight, out of mind, and just put Band-Aids on everything. Eventually, you have to deal with the root causes, whether it's a medical issue or whether it's, a social policy issue, undoubtedly. So, all right, let's remind our listeners that they are listening to this week's Law and News here on 90.3 WHBC with Bill McIntyre, myself, Jon Gallo, and thankfully still joined for a little while here by Nassau County Legislator Siela Bynoe. And certainly, that was definitely the main topic, and we wanted to, get your perspective on, because we knew that you were, one of the people who were most kind of in staunch opposition, and were articulating all those reasons of why that is such. I guess maybe just to wrap that before we just touch a couple other quick topics in the few moments we have, what are the prospects now? Because I know it's been kind of discussed of it, like I said, being potentially either repackaged or re-amended, and then tried to, or even just override the veto of that bill. What do you see with that, I guess, going forward?
So the realities of this bill in this moment being, having the override addressed in the legislature on a revote, I think is, hopefully it's slim to none, based on the fact that they need the supermajority, and Josh has already said that he would respect the decision, or the opinion, I should say, better put, the opinion of the Attorney General, and that he would not look to support an override of County Executive Curran's veto.
Okay, so then it would have to either be an amended version, or a version that he wasn't the sponsor of, that maybe somebody else picked up in another cycle or something like that. Okay.
But it's sad to think that there's only one person stopping that, right?
Indeed. In this moment, from what I haven't spoken to Legislator DeVigi Whitten, about her support of the bill and whether she would consider overriding the veto. So I don't know whether there's one or if there's two. I'm unsure, and we have yet to hear from Legislator Gallo on what his take would be on this bill. So I think there are a few, there are at least three people that are in play.
Okay.
But without Josh,
Right.
I don't see it being able to be successful in the moment.
I see. Okay, that is certainly interesting. We'll certainly tell everyone to continue to follow along with, obviously, the issue, and obviously where you and the folks who are in support of it see this moving forward, going into the next few
In opposition
weeks.
of it.
Yes.
Definitely.
No, you're in opposition, but I know there are people like in the other delegation who are in support.
Got it.
So certainly, like I said, it's good to know all the perspectives, but certainly your opposition was loud and clear today, as always, to that specific piece of bill, or anything that in theory makes it even harder for the communities to kind of have the proper, or not proper, but to have a healthier, dialogue and just effectiveness when it comes to policing and the general public at large. So, okay, we only have a few minutes left, but I did want to bring up another thing that I know you got.
Yeah, we're running out of time. Actually, we got it. Yeah. The clock on the wall is screaming at us that we need to get out of here.
All right. Sorry about that. So we'll have to have you on another time, Legislator Bynoe, and then definitely
always enjoy
this IDA bill that I think you got some credit for. This tax rebate about the environmental kind of protection.
All right,
so
John.
We'll get into that later.
Let's go.
Thank you very much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you for joining us, spending some time.
Take care. Have a good weekend.
To the listening audience, you can catch this week's Long Island News every Friday at 3 o'clock right here on the station that helps you communicate, 90.3 WHBC.